Hey Collective, it's Alan. I'm coming to you with another video that will be accompanying a post I'm releasing on LinkedIn that centers around an old topic that we had previously discussed only in the written form, relating to a predictive model that existed from back in the 60s that kind of foretold the way that evolution would go and kind of the different stages that we as a species would go through. Only for this particular post, what I wanted to do is revisit the topic in a more innovative and creative way by using superhero archetypes in order to explain each phase in a way that would best relate to everyone. So as promised in the LinkedIn community, what I had stated very clearly was that though it seemed complex as an overall model, what I wanted to do was ground it in a way where it would speak to not only those that were religious and faith-based, but also those that were atheists and those that were more philosophical or theological. And I was going to use these archetypes as a way to ground the energy in a way that we would all be able to come together and understand what it is that we were witnessing through this very divisive period of time. So at the root of spiral dynamics, what happens is that it basically color codes a system by which the species evolved over a length of time. And for those of you who are more into the New Age movement, or those of you who are more spiritual, what I would say is when you think of the color coding system that I'm about to go over very briefly before we launch into the actual video piece, what I would say is look at it from the standpoint of different grade levels that each soul goes through as it evolves and ascends out of the darkness and out of the shadows of ignorance and so forth. So for the purposes of this, let's just go with the color coding, but just equate it to a sense of elementary school, junior high, high school, and then college. And I will try to break it down as best I can in a brief summation. Okay. So in spiral dynamics, as a predictive dialer, what it basically starts off with is stage one, which is the beige color, basically spoken to as the primal and animalistic expression of the human condition, where you would think more of the caveman or cavewoman scenario. Followed quickly in the elementary school phase with the stage two in purple, where nature and the cosmos are frightening and where superstition kind of dominates, and that there are gods in the heavens and that they have various different functions, and you would think more of the Greek or Mayan temples, right? Stage three, you enter into the middle school, which is basically thought out to be a red color. And this is where the world is tough and dangerous and where we must fight to survive in spite of what others want. Basically, a movement in order to own other kingdoms and so forth. And you would think more of the Middle Ages, right? Stage four, which would be kind of the more accelerated middle school level, would be where we must obey a higher authority, a dogmatic principle where only the faith-based people will be saved. That ideology that many of us still hold on to in this phase of evolution. Not that there's anything wrong with it, because I had stated in the original written form that everyone has to go through the different levels, and that for me, even as evolved as you might see me, I still very much believe in a great architect, or what you all believe in, God. But that developmental stage came after a very long dark period, the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, where we basically had to find our way forward, right? Which is then followed into the kind of, you would say, the freshman year of high school, which would be coded in orange, which is pragmatically testing for advantages, basically, the Renaissance, or looking at the more scientific fields and the philosophical adventure that we as spiritualists and as souls began to test the waters in, right? Followed by stage six, which is green, where we share a habitat for all of humanity, where I posted in the written form that you would think more of the New Age or Aquarian Age type of mentality, something that unites humanity as a single, moving towards a single organism, but that had not yet matured to that. At that point, we would still be dabbling in different things in order to better understand ourselves, right? Stage seven, which is where I highlighted it in capital letters for those of you who saw it on LinkedIn, is specifically where we're at risk of utter and absolute collapse as a species, where everything that we once upheld suddenly becomes threatened by new principles and new ideologies as people find their freedom, but freedom comes with a cost. And it basically is pretty much what we're seeing right now, with a lot of Americans feeling as though everything's kind of falling in on itself, and where's this coming from, and where's this chaos, and what can we do about it? So it forecasted this back in the 60s that it would happen, and we seem to be right on track for how it developed. Now, the last stage that I focused on was interesting because it's something that I've been speaking to over the past 2 years over in the written form on my LinkedIn accounts, which had to do with a turquoise, the stage 8, basically the graduation into the more collegiate experience, where we're realizing that we are one entity, that we are actually one organism, whether you believe it to be Gaia, whether you believe it to be under the great architect, the God principle, but that we are all aspects to a greater whole, and that we now have to rise into positions of responsibility and power for each other together to rebuild a community's understanding that there's order within the chaos, and how do we then proceed forward? Something that I personally believe you all would better understand as getting to the point where we start to actually be able to answer the question of the Fermi paradox and other riddles and paradoxes that we are now coming to understand. Multiverse, simulation, all of these higher principle ideals that are suddenly falling on our lap, but that are still needing leaders and people who want to investigate it in a way that is non-offensive and non-intrusive to other people, and that kind of presents it in a collective way, and it brings people together towards the table. So, from an evolutionary stance, what I wanted to do was go back over it from the stance of archetypes, specifically those that we find in superheroes. And the reason I wanted to do this is because one of the things that happens in an evolutionary model is that it brings different universes together, meaning different types of personalities and different types of skill sets that somehow are gifted a little bit more, or that have been here long enough, and whether you believe in reincarnation or whatever you believe in, but that has been within the school long enough to now be entering mastery and into the graduate program. And how those leaders seem to have skill sets that we, as mere students, are just basically learning to grasp. So, from the ideal of the multiverse, what I needed to do was kind of establish the worlds that exist within the superhero mentality, so as to ground it in a spiritual lens by which I can invite each of you to the table so you can understand it from a model perspective. So, let's begin with the two universes that are main staples for the greater audience, which is DC Comics and Marvel Universe, which, as you guys know, I was not one of those kids that stayed at home. I was a latchkey kid, and I was an outdoor cat. I was always out, so I didn't really read comic books, so I had to go backpedal a little bit to kind of understand the difference between the two and kind of ground it into a way that I could then speak to it. So, one of the things that happens as the evolutionary model begins is that you realize that some people have these skill sets that they don't necessarily know where they're coming from. For you spiritualists, it would be those that would be divinely gifted. You know, people who are blessed or chosen by a higher power that you can see, possess things that are not normalized in the human condition. Abilities to foresee things that will happen in the near future, things that relate to religion and science and can bridge gaps, or people who have the skill sets to do very futuristic type of things that are really just grounded in evolution itself. So you would begin in your particular situation with being in the blue level, where you are very religious, very dogmatic, and that as you moved upwardly, you would begin to find yourself in remembering who you are, and beginning to kind of assess the skill sets that you have that maybe you bring to the table in a different way. But one of the things that happens as you make your way through the green phase and then into the yellow phase is that you would eventually run into what we call the ego phase, where you would have to kind of dismantle things in order to find yourself in your true sense of north, right? What is your north compass? And so one of the best ways to look at it is, do you guys remember in the DC universe, I think it was, where they first started to play with trying to get a wider audience? I think it was back in the 70s, from what I researched. And what they did is they started to bring these superhero types towards each other, but in a conflictive way, where it would be like Wolverine versus, I don't know, Spider-Man, or it would be Superman versus Wonder, I don't know, it would be whatever it is, Xavier, like, you know, things like that, where the two universes would come together, but it was conflictive, where they would have to get over their egos in order to finalize something that would become what we see as the Super Friends or the X-Men, which would be turquoise. So one of the things I wanted to do with the spiritualists is so that you don't feel left out, what I want you to kind of look at is that, and especially in the DC comic universe, there is something called the alter ego. The lower expression that the world sees that the other superheroes don't see. It's something that they present to themselves outwardly. Where someone like Superman would be Clark Kent to the outside world, meaning that his soul would register as the Superman, but he would present himself in the universal world that we see as Clark Kent. And Batman would be Bruce Wayne. Who else? Iron Man would be Tony Stark. Wonder Woman would be Diane Prince. And then Spider-Man would be Peter Parker. So one of the great things about superheroes is that you realize that they are connected to an alter ego, which is a very important staple in spirituality, religion, and so forth, and theosophy as a general rule, which basically states that we as a species are connected to a soul that is actualized through an avatar that we represent to the outside world, and that the jobs and careers that we have in this somehow nourishes the soul and its ability to do what it needs to do. So for you, you would be looking at this model from the standpoint point of understanding the alter ego, and understanding that it is by overcoming the shadow nature of the alter ego that they eventually rise and ascend in the way that Jesus did. Now, that's a really high concept, but it's something that helps you better understand what it is that people are speaking to when they speak to this particular model over a course of time. It's the evolution of dealing with your shadow, being able to overcome the things, love, lust, all of the greed, all of the hypocrisy, and rising to the occasion to then become who you're meant to be, so as to then actualize something on behalf of divine will. For you, for us, I should say, because I'm part of this crew, we would feel it from an order coming from the great architect, or what you call God, or whatever you, or Allah, whoever you believe in, speaking to you in your soul, and you registering that you need to make changes in order to actualize the highest vibrational expression of yourself. So for you, you have the easiest path to understand what it is that they're actually talking about when they use the idea of becoming the superhero. Because as many of you know, I've had a big issue with the whole idea behind this, because I was always telling everybody, no one's coming to save you. This time around, regardless of what happens or whatever the outcome is, when we are brought together, it will be based on trials and tribulations, and that this is an end run. So I'd always said, don't look for someone else coming to save you. It's you who are going to save yourself. And in you actualizing that world and overcoming everything that you've had to overcome, you become the superhero you have always idolized, only it's you. And you can then help share your story and how you overcame things in order to then lead others without forcing them, right? Because we're a free will state. Now, for you atheists, this is an interesting point of view, which is if you realize these are all mortals that have a tendency to have actualized something different. They just have skill sets. For you, it would just be looking at something, instead of relying on more of the X-Men aspect, where it would be someone who genetically engineers or kind of mutates something. You can kind of look more at the DC comic book expression of it, of just human beings that come from other places that somehow feel as though they're foreign or alien, which a lot of you who feel isolated and lonely can identify with, and they find their way to who they truly are and actualize themselves in a superpower ability, which then serves humanity. The big point to this. So for atheists, though you may not understand the dogmatic, religious, theosophical aspect of it, you can understand the service to humanity and the will to do good for other people. And it is that superhero quality that you then would look at and focus your energy on, into what skill sets you bring to the table and what you can further develop. Now, for those of you who are super dogmatic and religious, the way that I would look at this particular model is kind of through the lens of, what would happen if we're trying to understand, going from yellow, which is the ego and kind of the superhero aspect of yourself, coming into conflict with others who are like you, trying to find your community, and understanding that not everyone means you well, but that you are kind of evolving and elevating. And as you glow up, you kind of bring other people toward you that you either have to kind of work through, or that you will become friends or colleagues with, and either become super friends or X-Men. But for the religious dogmatic principle, for those of you who are really firm believers in faith, you might look at it more from the standpoint of Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, all having been brought onto earth in order to help the earth transition into a much higher principle, that it would then be able to deal with whatever the repercussions are to the changes that come with evolution. Because remember, by the time that we get into the yellow phase, where we as a collective are feeling that we're at, we're starting to see the collapse of old structures that can no longer support the weight of ideals that don't fit an evolving model. That doesn't mean that they're wrong, it just means that evolution waits for no one. So for you, you might look at the superhero consideration more from the standpoint of archangels returning to earth in order to help humanity rise to the occasion to be able to make it out of the darkness, to make it out of willful ignorance, to be able to make it out of whatever the shadows are, and overcome the tyranny, the hypocrisy, the greed, and all of the worst lower vibrational things that you can do. And as you did that, you would start to move towards collectives, into communities, either building them yourselves or being part of something greater than yourself that serves a much wider collective. You would be less involved in yourself as you move upwards and become more invested in how you can serve humanity, meaning that you're moving towards from yellow to turquoise. Now, the great thing about this model is that there's no wrong place to be, regardless of whether you're an atheist, whether you're spiritual, whether you are dogmatic, or whether you're just a human being existing. There's no wrong place to be in the model. In fact, you can fluctuate, right? There are moments where I rely 100% on my faith in the great archetype, which you call God. It's, for me, faith is the beacon that finds me in the greatest darkness. It's the beacon that brings me love and light, and that helps me overcome anything I've ever had. But that doesn't mean that I then don't fluctuate back upwards towards the turquoise group of how can I speak to that message without making other people believe in things that is not right for them, right? I'm a really big proponent of freedom and the free will of thought, the free will of expression, the free will of speech, right? And so I always try to find ways to speak to a wider demographic that brings you together without being conflictive or without making you feel bad. And so I'm just saying to everybody, no matter where you find yourself in this model, know that you are exactly where you're meant to be. And that over the course of time and over the experience, over your own lifetime, you will begin to move upward and downward into where you feel the most comfortable. So this is not telling humanity that you need to go from the blue stage, which is very religious and very protected and very isolatory, and being part of your community, and then having to be part of the turquoise group, which is much more about the freedom and responsibility to think outside of the box and so forth. You are perfectly safe where you are, and we're not trying to rush nobody. But it helps you better understand what we are witnessing in a way that allows everyone to kind of grasp it in a way that isn't as terrifying and reduces the fear aspect, which is super important, right? Fear does amazingly bad things to normal people. And one of the things that we're seeing that was part of the written form is the great divide that is happening within our collective, where we're seeing a lot of us devolve, meaning they're going backwards. They're becoming either manipulated or fearful to such a degree that they're acting in ways that they wouldn't have acted, betraying themselves to what they used to believe in because they are now activated or angered or somehow manipulated into these bomb-like actions where they are now saying things that go against what they once firmly believed in. And that's part of the process of evolution. It's destructuring what we thought we knew in order to find our own purpose and balance within the new world unfolding. So when I was looking at the model, what I really wanted to present to everybody is to understand that one of the things about this particular ideal of this superhero complex is that we are also in danger of creating what I call supervillains, right? People who are so locked into their own mentality that they become more of the Magneto than they are the Tony Stark, so lost to their ego that they can't overcome it in a way that will then be of service to a collective super friends mentality, which is what the turquoise group is and what we are seeing finally starting to crystallize within humanity, right? Enough of humanity has reached a point within their trajectory where they are starting to see things fall apart within their own lives and within the structures that we once held. That doesn't mean that we want that to happen, but that we are witnessing regardless of what our intention is or what we want. It's something that is just naturally happening from the weight of the hypocrisy, the lies, and the greed. We're seeing things that are so outlandish and criminals doing all sorts of stuff that they're trying to get away with. And we are then caught in this crisis kind of mentality where we're seeing things from a collapsing standpoint, forgetting that where there's chaos, there is order. There is a new future. And the Super Friends and the X-Men that are being brought together are people who are at the level where they are seeing the crisis and are moving to action in order to solve it, whether it's in front of the camera, behind the camera, or seen or unseen. What they're doing is they're serving humanity in a way that serves everyone equally, and they're understanding the crisis, right? Because one of the things that we are promised as an evolutionary model is that we are eventually going to reach the Fermi paradox, where as a collective, it will be a group panel type setting that will break through that. And those particular people will then guide us forward, because that's the only way that we seem to understand the universe will allow us to break free and become multiplanetary, right? That's a big quest for a lot of wonderful people. Which brings us to understanding it from a humanistic term, where you don't see anybody manipulating DNA, but rather you can rely on humanity and science and faith coming together in order to actualize it. And what I mean by this is, let's look at people that exist within pop culture that I'm not saying they are these things, but that have similar archetypal structure to who they are, that can help us better grasp and understand that mortals can become the leaders of the future. And so let's look at someone like Tony Stark, Iron Man. So one of the things about Tony Stark and Iron Man is that he's a bit of a philanthropist and a bit of a womanizer and a little bit of a flirt and really outgoing and really personal. Who within our collective consciousness would you say kind of resembles that kind of personality trait, but that is 100% human, even though people question it because he's advanced, he thinks outside the box, he doesn't see problems, he sees solutions, and he doesn't understand why the world doesn't necessarily react to the things that he sees the same way? Well, duh, there's Musk. He's a perfect example of someone who could go either way. He could, not either way that way, but I mean like either, he could go either, if he gets, I hope he doesn't find this offensive, but if lost to his own ego, he could go the path of Magneto, very egoish and very driven by wanting to ensure that he's in control of everything all the time, which would be detrimental to the X-Men, and would go in complete contrast to Xavier, who would be the evolutionary model of Tony Stark if he stayed on the right path, regardless of what the comic book said happens to him. I mean, none of us are making it out of this simulation alive, so I don't know what the big surprise is if something happens to us, but we're not gonna get worried about that right now. The point that we're making is that you can see that he has certain personality traits that are shared with Tony Stark, but that is 100% human. He's just evolved, and he did a lot of study. He invested into himself to such a degree that he now leads the world in a very proper and very powerful manner. And regardless of what path he takes personally, we can see him as not a false idol necessarily, but as just a human being who's trying to do his best to serve as many people as he can. And he doesn't conform to the social norms that the rest of us do. How can he? He has Asperger's, right? So, but he has skill sets that seem foreign to us that make some of us sometimes question if he's from our planet, which obviously he is. But the point is that he's a human. Now, let's look at someone who represents more of the Batman and Robin dynamic. Two incredibly powerful people who are moving entire social structures into action, into understanding the collective consciousness in a new and fascinating way. Well, duh, Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan is the perfect Batman. Not only is he just like Bruce Wayne and very much involved in things, he's gone through the shadow. He's gone through the backlash. He's had literally cancel culture come after him and come out looking at people going like, I made it through. I don't know what you're worried about. He's a perfect example of someone who then brought on a brother type, a younger man who is equally as impressive as he is, and who together in their friendship are expanding consciousness at such a rate that the rest of the world is trying to understand how it is that they're doing it. Meanwhile, they're absolute normal human beings, but they've studied. The thing about Joe Rogan that reminds me so much of Batman is his fascination and curiosity to explore our world. He's not trying to be right. In fact, he likes to sometimes play the jughead. He loves to play that role because he allows the audience to feel comfortable in a way that they can explore topics and conversations that are of interest to not just only himself, but that expand us and rise us. And then you look at someone like a kid brother, like Robin, who obviously would be Lex Friedman, who is so incredibly powerful in his own way that I kind of didn't want to equate him as Robin, but maybe more as the adult expression of Robin as an evolved soul, because I think of him as a temperance angel. Have you ever watched him do an interview? There's something fascinating about his approach to allow somebody to speak for themselves and allow the audience to choose of their own accord if they're full of shit or if they're full of not shit. And the ability that he has in his timbre and his tonality to allow you to be responsible for your own reactions to that individual. And I find that incredibly empowering to humanity. So let's look at someone like Jack Dorsey, who everyone knows I absolutely love. I cannot get enough of Jack Dorsey, and here's why. It's because he's a serial entrepreneur who actually tried to create a community that rose above it, and he did it in such a powerful way that he was sabotaged from within, in my personal opinion, sabotaged from within people he thought were for his best interest and for his goal, but in actuality ended up actually bringing it down and ended up having to have, Elon have to take over in order to try to get it to swing back at least the equal distance that it had swung in complete opposition. It had become so different than what he had idealized that he ended up like stepping down. This wasn't his vision anymore, but yet he's the one who carries the key to that master plan. He's someone who, in my humble opinion, is a very human person who found spirituality and through that basically studied and brought the two worlds of science and faith together in a way where he now has an incredible empire that he is building, but he is, again, human. He just studied like the rest of us do. And he is such a rewarding figure. Then you have someone like Trevor Noah, who reminds me a bit of Wolverine with his satire and the way that he speaks. He was born into a situation he overcame much more than any of us in America could ever consider, into apartheid of all things, and then overcame it and became a host of a TV show that actually challenges people on a day-to-day basis through humor. And he cut through the facade. And he did it as a human. It's part of his world and part of your world. And the message that I'm then sending to you guys is to understand that humans are capable of doing everything a superhero can. Superman's power is X-ray vision. That just means he can cut through the bullshit and he can see through the truth. And from that, he can do proper alignment, action, and he can take proper course adjustments, and he can do things. Wonder Woman has the lasso of truth. Again, another principle that humans have. It's called discernment. It's an intuitive quality the divine feminines and divine masculines carry within themselves over the course of their trajectory. Now, what happens when the bat signal goes out? Or when Superman's signal goes out? Or what happens when Wonder Woman's called and they are brought together? Now that's the interesting part. That's the evolutionary leap that humanity is facing, is how can we bring these types of people to the same table to talk about the same topics in front of the world in a way that involves everyone in a way that is non-offensive, non-obtrusive, and that brings people upward instead of downward, right? Without castigating other people. Right? Because everyone has the right to if they want to throw hissy fits and they don't want to evolve and they want things to be the way that they are because they don't like change, well, then let them do it. Because regardless of whatever they want, evolution will keep moving forward. It's not going to wait for us. But that doesn't mean we have to make them feel bad about themselves or challenge them in a way that breaks them apart. In fact, we support each other because if it wasn't for them, there would be no foundation for us to step forward, right? Without every single religious dogmatic person, there would be no spirituality. There would be no evolution of the Aquarian age. You couldn't have that without the people that you were then looking your nose down at. So I always say to people, don't judge another human being. Sorry, I'm getting preachy. Don't judge another human being because you don't know what they've been through. There is a reason why Jesus Christ used to wash people's feet. It's because it is by their footprints that we found our path and found our way home. So don't ever look down at anybody else. But what happens when you bring these different type of mentalities and these different type of incredible mindsets with these incredibly gifted people who are humans? They're not superheroes. They're just connecting to their higher purpose and to their soul. What happens when you bring them together and you maybe expose them to a new educational system, or you bring their strengths up and focus like Elon wants to do with the school that he has? The only thing with Elon is that he, again, is very focused on engineering and sciences, but others of us would be more interested in English, literature, and the importance behind spirituality and the cross-section between how spirituality, religion, and science mirror each other. They're both trying to figure out the same equations. They're just coming at it from different lenses. So what happens when you take these superhero archetypes that exist within the human condition and you bring them into a setting by which they become the super friends? Colleagues who, regardless of whether they disagree or agree with each other, come to the table understanding that they are doing something on behalf of humanity that can save us. Because regardless of how you look at this, whether you're religious, atheist, dogmatic, I don't know, whatever the different phases are of evolution that you're in, we are in a serious situation. There are people playing with things that shouldn't be played with. And there are repercussions that are going to happen regardless of how we feel about it through AI advent and whether it becomes sentient or not. There are things that we need to look at in a long-term trajectory that people in this planet, for some reason, including myself, tend to struggle with looking at through only short-term. Now, the problem is that short-term doesn't equal long-term results. And part of the collapse we're seeing is short-sightedness. So this panel, the idea behind the Super Friends mentality and the ideal behind bringing the X-Men and Super Friends together is that they do something on behalf of all of us. They represent all of us and what their pursuits are, and they do it publicly with transparency so as to bring us all into the conversation in a way that helps us evolve and stand tall with each other, arm in arm, in order to face these obstacles and consequences to some of the actions we have taken. So as I end this, what I wanted you all to understand is spiral dynamics was built in the 60s, and yet to this day it still applies. In fact, everything that it has predicted has come true. The question is, will we all hear the call And will we ensure that the other like-minded individuals who you see holding the keys to our future, if you will then bring them together? Because if they can overcome their ego and get through the yellow phase in order to hit that turquoise phase, there's no stopping the evolution and the advancements we as a species can make, and the harmony through chaos that will come from the unity of understanding that we are not heading towards the great singularity unless we fail the mission. But if we understand the mission, we will be brought together and we will overcome anything that comes our way. And that is the message I want to leave you with for this particular video. I hope you guys have an incredibly, wonderfully blessed day. I hope this made sense to you, and I hope that I lived up to my promise for my LinkedIn audience. I know you guys are seeing what I'm seeing, but there is purpose to this. You have to have faith. It is the beacon that will get you through any darkness. But understand that you're not alone. This time, all of us as a species are in this together. Now, what are we going to do about it?